Ancient Egypt, a life born among the gods, an eternity shaped by death. Close your eyes and, for a moment, leave behind the time you live in, the world that surrounds you, and all the rules you know. For now, we set out on a journey to ancient Egypt, a land where the sun was believed to be not merely a celestial body, but a sacred being, where death was not an end, but the beginning of a long and arduous journey, and where human destiny was shaped by the breath of the gods. This was not merely a civilization where stone pyramids rose, golden masks gleamed, or hieroglyphs were carved into walls. It was a universe in which the gods touched every moment of human life silently, yet with absolute power, and where even everyday existence was perceived as part of a divine order. For the ancient Egyptians, the human being was not a creature standing at the center of the universe. Rather, humanity was a small yet meaningful part of a cosmic order established by the gods, an order explained through a sacred story that stretched back to the very moment the universe was born. In that first moment, when time had not yet begun to flow, when space had no boundaries, when sky and earth, light and darkness had not yet been separated, the only thing that existed was an infinite and silent chaos. The ancient Egyptians called this boundless, formless, and dark void none. None was not merely a point of beginning, but also an absolute nothingness to which everything could one day return. A primordial state of existence where order had not yet been born, where no laws operated, and where everything waited in a state of pure potential. And from within this darkness emerged the first divine power, without the need for a mother or a father, existing through its own consciousness alone. This first god was born out of solitude. Yet this solitude was not a lack, but creation itself. For the consciousness that wished to exist also carried within it the first will to shape the universe. Becoming aware of its own existence, this god created a center within chaos and began to take the first steps toward order. For according to ancient Egyptian belief, order did not arise spontaneously, but through conscious will. To break its solitude and bring balance to the universe, it created from itself two fundamental forces. One was air, the essence of breath, movement, and life. The other was a divine power representing moisture, harmony, and cosmic balance. These two beings softened the harshness of chaos, filled the void, and defined the first boundaries of the universe. From the union of these primordial forces emerged the most fundamental duality of existence: earth and sky. The earth was heavy, stable, fertile. The sky was boundless, enveloping, infinite. Yet in the beginning, these two were not separated. The sky clung tightly to the earth, completely covering it, leaving not a single space in which breath could exist. This suffocation did not allow life to be born, until air intervened. The sky was lifted upward, the earth remained below, and the space between them became the sacred realm in which humans, animals, and plants would live. The world of humanity was born through this separation. The children born from the union of sky and earth were no ordinary beings. They were four powerful figures who would stand at the heart of ancient Egyptian mythology and determine the fate of both gods and humans. These four siblings were not merely gods born of the same parents, but the embodied forms of order, love, chaos, and mystery. The eldest represented wisdom and order. He taught humanity how to cultivate the land, how to share their harvests, and how to live together. And for this reason, people embraced him not only as a god, but also as the first king. During his reign, the world was in balance. The Nile overflowed, the land grew fertile, and people believed they lived under the watchful protection of the gods. Yet every order carries within it a fracture. One of the brothers embodied the scorching heat of the desert, the destructive force of storms, and uncontrollable change. He was the god of chaos, but this chaos was not meaningless destruction, rather a force that tested order itself. However, instead of understanding the power he represented, people chose to fear him, and fear gradually turned into exclusion. The love and reverence shown to his brother planted a silent but deep jealousy within him. For chaos, left in the shadow of order, felt its own existence being devalued. And it was this feeling that ignited the greatest rupture among the gods. This rupture did not result merely in a murder. It was the death of order, the breaking of balance, and the shaking of the universe itself. Brother killed brother. He dismembered him, and cast his body into the waters of the sacred river. For the first time, the world lost its justice. But in ancient Egyptian mythology, no death is ever an end in itself. For love, magic, and loyalty can alter even the fate of the gods. His wife set out in search of him. She crossed rivers, marshes, and deserts, gathering his dismembered body and reassembling it. This quest was not merely the devotion of a spouse, but the first great struggle of life against death. Through magic, patience, and faith, she restored him to life, if only temporarily. Yet this return did not belong to the old world. The slain god was no longer the ruler of the living, but the lord of the dead. And thus, in ancient Egypt, death ceased to be a terrifying annihilation and became an ordered, judged, and meaningful journey. The child born from this union grew to avenge his father and restore balance to the universe. His struggle was not merely a battle for the throne, but the earthly reflection of the eternal war between order and chaos. This conflict lasted for years, within the council of the gods, across the heavens and the deserts, until order ultimately prevailed. For humanity, the meaning of this victory was profound, for from then on, every king who ruled the world would be regarded as the representative of this divine order. This is why the pharaohs were gods. In ancient Egypt, the gods were not distant or unreachable beings. They were present in everyday life. The rising of the sun was a miracle. The flooding of the Nile was a blessing. Birth, death, illness, and harvest were reflections of the will of the gods. People believed that the gods watched over them while they worked, prayed, loved, and died. For if balance were not preserved, chaos could return, and chaos meant the end of everything. Death in ancient Egypt, the threshold of judgment and eternity. In ancient Egypt, death was not seen as an ending. On the contrary, it was a sacred threshold where a person's true trial began, a moment in which every choice, every action, and every intention made throughout life gained meaning. When a person drew their final breath, the world did not fall silent for them. Instead, an unseen door opened, and the soul stepped into an entirely different journey ruled by the gods. This journey was neither sudden nor uncertain, for the ancient Egyptians believed they knew, step by step, and in great detail, what awaited after death. This knowledge was passed down through generations in the teachings of priests, on tomb walls, in papyri, and in prayers. Although people did not know how they would be born, they lived their lives knowing how they would be judged and what stages they would have to pass through. At the moment of death, the body was left behind, yet a human being was not defined solely by the body. The soul was not perceived as a single, simple entity, but as a composite of distinct parts that complemented one another. each playing a vital role in the journey beyond death. The Ka, representing life force, remained close to the body. The Ba, symbolizing personality, emotions, and character, could move freely. And the Ak was the immortal and sacred state of the soul that emerged only when the proper rituals were completed and judgment was successfully passed. This is why the body had to be preserved, mummified, and kept recognizable. If the soul lost its way, it could not reach eternity. After death, the soul was guided toward a dark and silent passage, a long path woven with fear and hope, stretching between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. The soul was not alone on this journey, for the first being to greet it was Anubis, the guide of the dead. With his jackal-headed form, Anubis was known as the protector of tombs, mummification, and the deceased, accompanying the soul so that it would not lose its way. To the ancient Egyptians, Anubis was not a figure to be feared, but a just and silent guide. He existed not to punish the soul, but to lead it to its rightful destination. As the soul approached the gates of the underworld under Anubis's guidance, it knew there was no return. Beyond this point, neither wealth, nor status, nor worldly power held any meaning. Here, only the true weight of the heart mattered. The underworld was not a dark and monotonous void. Rather, it was a complex realm filled with gates, halls, guardians, and trials. Throughout this journey, the soul confronted its fears, regrets, and hidden intentions, for the gods left nothing concealed, not even what a person had hidden from themselves. The most important and decisive moment of this journey began upon reaching the Great Hall of Judgment. There, the soul was brought before the gods, with nowhere left to flee. At the center of the hall stood the sacred scales, representing the balance of the universe. On one pan of the scale lay the human heart. On the other rested the feather, the symbol of truth, justice, and cosmic order. In ancient Egyptian belief, the heart was the center of thought and morality. It was where a person's true identity resided. At the moment of judgment, Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing, recorded the outcome. Without emotion, without bias, he wrote only the truth. This was the moment when the soul's fate was sealed. If the heart weighed heavier than the feather, it meant that the person had disrupted balance, acted unjustly, and disregarded order during their lifetime. Such a soul faced a terrifying fate. A monstrous being would destroy it, denying it eternity. This was the greatest punishment in ancient Egypt, for to be annihilated was to be denied eternal existence. But if the heart was as light as the feather, or lighter, then the soul was deemed worthy of the greatest reward. It was admitted into the presence of Osiris, the ruler of the realm of the dead. Osiris had been slain in the world of the living, yet through death he rose to a higher state. He was no longer the god of death itself, but the god of order after death. A soul that stood before him bowed not in fear, but in hope, for Osiris rewarded those who were just. Having passed judgment, the soul opened the gates of eternity. This eternity was not a dark waiting, but an ideal form of life. Green fields, fertile lands, and an existence free from pain and illness. There, one was reunited with loved ones and lived in peace under the watchful care of the gods. For this reason, the ancient Egyptians lived their lives with great care, paying close attention to their words, oaths, and actions. For after death, nothing was forgotten. The gods might forgive, but the truth could never be hidden. This belief did not exist to instill fear, but to preserve balance. In ancient Egypt, morality was not merely a social rule. It was a cosmic necessity. For when a person's heart grew heavy, It was not only the individual who suffered, but the order of the universe itself. And perhaps that is why, even thousands of years later, the same whisper still lingers in the silent tombs of ancient Egypt. Life is temporary, but what you do follows you forever. The underworld in ancient Egyptian belief, a journey of trials and truth. In ancient Egyptian belief, the underworld was not a single dark void. On the contrary, it was a complex journey composed of layers, passages, gates, and trials, a chain of ordeals that could be completed not by the brave or the strong alone, but by those who were righteous. Before reaching the Hall of Judgment, the soul had to travel a long and perilous path, for the gods wished to see who a person truly was, not only at the final moment, but throughout the entire journey. This path was filled with narrow corridors cutting through darkness, rivers surrounded by fire, and gates, each representing a different fear. These early regions of the underworld were like a reflection of night in the world of the living. Yet here, darkness was not merely the absence of light, but the tangible form of the unknown, of regret, and of suppressed fears. As the soul moved through this darkness, it began to see not only what lay ahead, but also its own past. The first obstacles encountered on this journey were the gates. These gates were not ordinary passages made of stone or metal. Each was alive, conscious, and possessed its own name, guardian, and secret. Before allowing the soul to pass, the gates sought to know it. For in the underworld, nothing could conceal its identity. Before each gate stood guardians of terrifying appearance, beings with human-like bodies and animal heads, eyes glowing in the darkness, voices echoing like distant reverberations. They were not merely physical barriers, but entities that tested the soul's knowledge and awareness. To pass through these gates, the soul had to address the guardians by their correct names, recite sacred words without error, and declare its own innocence. A single misspoken word, a single forgotten name, could condemn the soul to remain before that gate for eternity. For this reason, the ancient Egyptians placed spells, prayers, and guiding texts within tombs. The journey after death depended on sacred knowledge that had to be memorized. Knowledge, just as in life, was the key to survival in the afterlife. As the gates were passed, the path grew ever more dangerous. In some regions stretched lakes of fire, not meant to burn sinful souls, but to frighten and test them. If the soul gave in to fear and strayed from its path, it would lead itself toward annihilation by its own will. In other passages, colossal serpents, scorpions, and crocodile-like creatures lay in wait. These beings symbolized chaos and primal fear. They did not attack, yet if the soul showed weakness, hesitated, or lost faith in itself, these creatures would block the way. One of the most feared beings of the underworld awaited the soul immediately after judgment, the force of annihilation that embodied the ancient Egyptians' greatest fear: eternal oblivion. This creature was Ammit, bearing the strength of a lion, the savagery of a crocodile, and the uncontrolled fury of a hippopotamus. Ammit was not a god, nor a punishing executioner. Her role was simply to eliminate that which was unbalanced. If a soul failed the judgment, Ammit would devour it and erase it completely. This was not torment like the fires of hell. It was the erasure of existence itself. In ancient Egyptian belief, there was no fate more terrifying, for it meant the loss of any chance for rebirth or repentance. Yet the underworld was not composed solely of fear and threat. It was also a realm where order and justice were preserved in their purest form. Monsters did not attack at random. Gates did not close arbitrarily. Everything served cosmic balance. A soul that successfully completed this journey left chaos behind. The gates closed, the monsters withdrew, and darkness softened into a gentler twilight. This was the sign that the soul had passed its trials. And at this point, before being admitted into the order of Osiris, the ruler of the realm of the dead, the soul paused one final time, silently recalling the life it had left behind. For progressing through the underworld was not merely moving forward, it was confronting the past. For the ancient Egyptians, these narratives were not fairy tales. These gates, these monsters, and this journey were powerful reminders of how life should be lived. Be honest, live with measure, stand by your word. For the darkness that awaits after death is, in truth, the reflection of one's own heart. And perhaps that is why, even thousands of years later, the gates of the underworld still feel as though they have never fully closed. For although human fears may change, the search for justice and balance never fades. Gods, priests, and daily life in ancient Egypt. In ancient Egypt, the gods did not rule only in the sky or the underworld. Their will extended beyond the stone walls of temples into streets, fields, homes, and the everyday habits of the people. The earthly representatives of this divine order were the priests, who served as a silent yet absolute bridge between gods and humans. To be a priest was not merely a profession or a social status, it was a sacred devotion that encompassed one's entire life. Priests were required to constantly purify both body and mind, for it was believed that a body approaching the presence of the gods had to be free from worldly impurities. In their daily lives, they bathed several times a day, avoided certain foods, wore special garments, and even chose their words with care. Temples in ancient Egypt were not merely places of worship, they were also regarded as miniature models of the universe. The innermost part of the temple was considered the gods' dwelling on earth, and not everyone was permitted to enter this sacred space. While the public remained in the outer courtyards, priests advanced step by step inward, moving farther away from the earthly world with each gate they passed. Temple rituals began before sunrise and continued throughout the day according to a meticulous order. With the first light of dawn, priests would awaken the god's statue, wash it, anoint it with oils, and dress it in clean garments. These rituals were not seen as symbolic, but as real, for the statue of the god was believed to be the god's actual presence on earth. As the sun made its journey across the sky, prayers were recited, hymns were sung, and offerings were presented. When evening came, the god was returned to rest, the doors were sealed, and the temple sank into silence. This cycle was repeated every single day without interruption, for it was believed that neglecting even one day could harm the cosmic balance. Priests did not serve the gods alone. They also addressed the problems of the people. Illnesses, disturbing dreams, droughts, or family conflicts were interpreted as signs from the gods. People consulted the priests, who then interpreted divine will and offered guidance. These interpretations were delivered through oracles, dreams, and sacred texts. For the ordinary Egyptian in daily life, the gods were not distant or unreachable beings. On the contrary, they were involved in every action. A farmer sowing seeds prayed for the fertility of the land and regarded the flooding of the Nile as a divine blessing. A mother, as she put her child to sleep, called upon the gods to protect them from unseen dangers. Inside homes, small household shrines were common, where food, drink, and modest offerings were presented. People wished to feel close to the gods not only in great temples, but also within their own homes. For the divine order had to be preserved not only during grand ceremonies, but also in the simplest moments of everyday life. Festivals and celebrations were among the most vibrant moments of ancient Egyptian society. On these days, statues of the gods were taken out of the temples and brought among the people. Music was played, dances were performed, and songs were sung. These festivals were believed to be rare moments when the gods celebrated alongside humanity, and they were a great source of joy for the people. At the center of this entire order stood the pharaoh. He was not merely a ruler, but a living god, the earthly reflection of the cosmic order of the heavens. The pharaoh's duty was to maintain balance between gods and humans. For this reason, wars, laws, taxes, and even architectural projects were all connected to divine order. Death, too, was a natural part of daily life. People began preparing their tombs while still alive, learned the prayers required for the journey beyond death, and performed the necessary rituals. A good death was seen as the result of a good life. In ancient Egypt, morality was not simply a social rule, but a cosmic necessity. Lying, acting unjustly, or breaking one's word were considered crimes not only against other people, but against the balance of the universe itself. This balance was embodied in the divine order that allowed the sun to rise again each morning, a law symbolized by the journey of the sun, god Ra. People believed that if they lived in accordance with this order, they would be able to stand before Osiris after death, with their heads held high. This belief created not fear, but a deep sense of responsibility, for everyone lived knowing that every action would one day be remembered. And this is why life in ancient Egypt was sacred from beginning to end. To work, to love, to create, to pray, and even to die were all parts of a divine order. While the gods ruled in the heavens, humans sustained that order on earth. Perhaps this is why ancient Egypt continues to move us even thousands of years later. Because instead of drawing a sharp line between life and death, they understood them as inseparable parts of the same eternal story. And now, as the sun disappears into the waters of the Nile, as the shadows of the temples stretch and dissolve into silence, the gods of ancient Egypt withdraw once more. Yet the story they told continues to live on, in stone, in tombs, and in the deepest chambers of the human heart. For they whisper this to us: life is not merely the moments in which we breathe. What truly matters is how lightly we carry our hearts as we pass through this world. And perhaps this is why, even thousands of years later, we still listen to these stories. Because although humanity may change, the questions we ask in the face of death and our search for eternity never do. Thank you for staying with us on this long and mysterious journey. If this story made you think, sparked your curiosity, or left a question lingering within you, then we have achieved our purpose.